I'm settling in beside you, voice low and even, while a pale visitor draws a quiet line through the dark. The sun has been loud lately, yet the traveller keeps its poise. You don't have to chase the headlines tonight. You can let me keep watch for you. Picture a still frame, a faint teal glow, a thin tail turned away from the light, a wash of soft radio hush beneath the stars. I'm here to tell you what matters gently and in order, without rush, without alarms. The story is simple at its heart. Something from far away is passing through, and despite the sun's tempers, it holds course. Before we drift, a small kindness to yourself. Set your phone to Do Not Disturb, and if you like, slip on headphones so every small sound lands softly. If this kind of calm science helps you rest, there's a playlist waiting when you wake, and a quiet corner of listeners who return for more slow skies. No urgency, just an open door. We'll keep the language clear and the steps unhurried. I'll mark the shape of things, then let the shape fade into a tide of steady facts and softer images. Where the data speaks, I'll let it speak. Where the gaps begin, I'll name them and pass through lightly. Nothing sharp, nothing that startles. I'll be your lighthouse tonight, one beam, repeating, never blinding, while the object glides on and the star breathes in long cycles. Breathe with it, breathe with me. When you're ready, we'll begin at the beginning, with a visitor that doesn't flinch, quiet and sure, ready. The first picture is still. A dark field, shallow grain, the stars not twinkling but steady, and in the centre, a faint teal halo. That quiet halo is our visitor. The sun has been loud in recent days, yet this small glow keeps its thread. I'm here with you, voice low, to let the frame do the speaking first. No rush. What you're seeing, if we let the imagination sit beside the instruments, is a body not born here. We learned the alphabet for such travellers with the first and the second, years ago. Interstellar means open paths, not loops. It means a speed that forgets capture, a line that bends only a little under the sun's pull before it flies on. The naming rules and the routine feel almost domestic now, but the emotion never quite is. Each arrival reminds us that the galaxy is not a distant mural. It has couriers. I think about why the line holds. Space is not empty, and the sun breathes in plasma and light, yet most of that breath is gentle at the scale of a compact, fast traveller. Radiation pressure pushes, but weakly. Solar wind flows, but diffuses. The larger tugs are gravity, and the object's own momentum, and those two write most of the story. When flares make headlines, it is natural to imagine a shove. When we measure carefully, we find whispers. Let's pause in the picture. The camera doesn't pan. The stars are small nails of light. The halo is not a smear tonight, just a crisp haze, the tail so fine that you catch it only when you soften your gaze. Somewhere, a dome motor hums once and rests. A cooling fan purls. You hear your own breath, patient and even. There is a little scent of dust and warm metal beside the imagined scope, and outside the air has that glassy feel after midnight when sound travels far. A dog barks once, then decides against it. Streetlights press faint amber into the lower sky, and high above that shallow glow, the comet keeps its quiet course. Back in the numbers, the case for steadiness begins before the fireworks. Observers stack nights of data to build a baseline, like a cartographer in lamplight tracing the same coast again and again until the inked line stops wobbling. That baseline is mercy. It lets tiny differences show themselves if they're real. With interstellar visitors, the method never changes. Measure, compare, refine, measure again. If the sun turns boisterous, we do not change the ritual. We just lean in. You might wonder whether jets of vapor from the surface could nudge the path. They can sometimes. Small non-gravitational pushes live in the math, labelled and watched. For a compact object moving fast on a hyperbolic swing, those terms are usually small, and if they grow for a spell, the growth announces itself not as alarm, but as a slight, repeatable tilt in the fit. The wonder of modern tracking is not magic. It is patience, married to measured light. A line of points across nights, each with its honest error bars, will tell you if the curve is misbehaving. I hold to the still frame because it reflects the feeling in the control rooms when the sun throws a bright tantrum and the object's ephemeris hardly twitches. That contrast is oddly soothing. The star shouts. Our visitor blinks and carries on. No false bravado here, only inertia and scale and time doing what they do. We can accept the physics without fuss. We can accept the calm. If this traveller were fragile at heart, we would see it first in the light, not in the road. Brightness would jitter beyond the gentle rise that heat can explain. The coma would ruffle in ways that defy a steady tale. But the halo remains composed, and the tail keeps to its lane, pale and fine, like chalk brushed once along a blackboard and left alone. That's the second piece of comfort. Structure reads as poise. I like to think of this chapter as the lighthouse chapter. A beam repeats. It does not need to be brilliant to be dependable. Every few seconds, it returns to the same angle and the same arc across the water, and every vessel in the night knows what to make of it. Our visitor's motion is that kind of signal. It says, I will pass through. I will not wander. It says, watch me gently, and you will learn what you came to learn. So we let the picture linger a breath longer. The frame holds. The quiet halo glows, as if from within, though we know it is only sunlight interpreted by dust and ice. Somewhere deep under that gauze, a small nucleus turns at its own slow pace, unconcerned with our metaphors. The instruments will have their logs, the ephemerides will have their decimals. For our purposes, a softer truth is enough tonight. The path is steady. The heart can rest in that. I lower my voice to the place where it almost folds into silence. The still image slips into the dark, and we let the chapter fade with it, the visitor seaming the night from left to right as if someone drew a line and then dimmed the room. The sun will breathe again, the road will remain. Fade to black, slowly, gently, and breathe. 02:17 UTC, a thin frost over the mountain road, and the control room lights are low enough to respect the stars. On the screen, I keep two windows open, a sky image with a faint smear of teal, and a table of numbers that looks like a tide chart written in decimals. Tonight's goal is simple. We draw our baselines before the sun grows loud. We ink the line until it stops wavering. A baseline is a promise to our future selves. It says, when the star erupts and everyone leans forward, we will know what changed and what did not. To make one, I gather precise astrometry, positions measured against a net of reference stars whose own motions are known, and I feed them into an orbit solver that is more patient than any one observer could be. The first nights are noisy, the arc is short, the fit is jumpy. Then new points arrive from other longitudes and other telescopes, and the wobble steadies. An ephemeris emerges, not as prophecy, but as the best map we can draw with the light we have. Think of a cartographer smoothing a coastline with many passes of a pen. The inked line earns its calm. Because our visitor is moving quickly on a hyperbolic path, timing is everything. Measure too sparsely, and tiny errors in angle turn into wide misses down the road. Measure often and cleanly, and the uncertainty shrinks like morning mist. The numbers beneath the picture, residuals, weights, the quiet letters that mark our solution's quality, are part of the lullaby here. They do not demand attention, they keep time. When the sun sends a surge of particles, we will compare then to now, and the comparison will be fair. I like to place the details on a simple grid. Observation dates down the left, observatory codes across a row, and on the right, the current ephemeris, where the comet should be if nothing unusual is happening. One by one, we overlay tonight's points. The spread is ordinary. The curve holds. A small release of breath follows. We are still drawing the same coast. Let's let the room slow for a minute. Air moves through the vents in a soft, steady thread. The dome outside turns a few degrees and rests. You can almost feel the mass settle. A kettle clicks and forgets its own heat. The monitors hum at a pitch that feels like a low shoreline, and the keyboard waits for the next measured tap. Every few moments the guider pings, a patient metronome. I imagine the sky cold and clean, the stars pressed into their places like points stitched on dark cloth. In that stillness, the inked line grows darker, not because we push harder, but because each pass of the pen adds confidence. Breathe in, breathe out. Let the grid hold you as it holds the data. Back at the console, we think about error. Not the kind that scolds, the kind that measures humility. Each position has a tiny cone of doubt around it. Stack enough independent cones, and the overlap tells you where the truth hides. This is how ephemerides mature. We do not chase precision with bravado, we earn it with repetition. When flares arrive, they cannot erase the groundwork, they can only test it. And tests, given a clean baseline, are welcome. There is a temptation, when solar weather grows dramatic, to credit every twitch of light to a new force. The baseline cures that. If the coma brightens as the object warms, we will see that trend already sketched before the storm. If the tail lengthens slightly, the earlier nights will have shown the first steps. Baselines defend us from stories we want to tell too quickly. They also allow small, honest surprises to stand alone. A tiny shift that persists across instruments and nights is not gossip. It is signal, and signal, measured against inked lines, teaches us calmly. So we keep our rituals. We cross-check the times, convert the coordinates with care, and watch the residuals drift toward silence. The plot of positions tightens. The uncertainty cloud shrinks to a neat almond. The prediction for tomorrow's sky feels less like guessing, and more like keeping an appointment. None of this is flashy. All of it is the reason we can sleep, while a star throws sparks. The sun may shout. Our map remains, quiet, sure, and ready to be compared when the weather turns. First, the room becomes sound, a thin carrier tone from the radio link, fans like far surf. The shutter clacks and then remembers to be quiet. On the second monitor, the X-ray trace lifts, smooth at first, then steeper, as if a swell gathers beyond the horizon. Someone in another building says "copy" into a headset, and you hear only the breath. the sun, has started to speak again. We keep our voices low. I let the soundscape run for a full minute. A hum, a tick, a soft relay snap, the faintest whir of a tracking motor stepping the dome by half a degree. You can imagine the air smelling of warm dust and cold metal. Somewhere a printer wakes, spits a single page, and settles back into silence. Nothing hurries. We listen the way sailors listen when wind rises, alert, not alarmed. This is weather at sea, and our small ship has good ballast. On the heliophysics feed, the sun blooms white-hot in false colour. An X-class flare ramps. The alphabet is simple here. A, B, C, M, X, each letter 10 times the power of the last. An ejection follows, a slow unfurl first, then a halo that peels outward like a ghostly surf ring. These are coronal mass ejections, archways of plasma lifted and released, a billow of charged particles setting off along the field lines and into the lanes between worlds. The numbers arrive in tidy columns. Start time, peak, integrated flux. Later, a speed estimate for the cloud and a forecast cone. We mark the time without drama. The data is a voice. It does not ask us to shout. What does such a blast mean for a traveller made of ice and rock and dust, already moving fast? It means pressure, but soft pressure, the leitmotif tonight. Radiation pressure is the constant push of light. Solar wind is the push of particles. Both are real. Both are bounded. For a compact nucleus with meaningful mass and momentum, the net is usually a nudge that edits the coma and tail more than the road. Dust grains charge and align, gas expands and glows. A tail can bend. A path need not. The scale of the shove matters, and so does the time over which it acts. Our visitor does not linger. It crosses the weather. I align the timestamps the way a deckhand coils rope. Flare onset here, CME launch there, shock arrival forecasted along a plane that intersects our object's corridor. Then I place our astrometric pins, points of light measured against the grid, each with honest error bars. If a push lands with consequence, the pins will whisper it. Not in one night, perhaps, but in a pattern that refuses to wash out as more points join. Instead, I see the gentle miracle of agreement. Tonight's fit kisses last night's, and both hold hands with the pre-storm baseline. The curve is unromantic, faithful. It returns to its own shape. We step back to the physics, because naming the parts calms the mind. A flare dumps energy into the corona, where magnetic fields tangle and snap. Particles accelerate, and some of them take the open road. The ejection is a heavier thing, a moving atmosphere with density and speed, and a front that can compress fields in its way. When such a front finds dust and ions near a comet, it can rearrange the coma's drapery. Imagine a windward hem lifting and a leeward hem pressed down. The dust tail bows a little. Ion streamers can ripple or kink. But the nucleus, dense and busy with its own rotation and outgassing rhythm, holds most of its momentum close like a keel. Forces add, scales decide. A second graph blinks alive, the proton flux stepping upward in neat terraces. We do the old, steady thing. Note, compare, move on. The observatory chat scrolls with short sentences, none of them theatrical. Someone posts a plot from a solar orbiter. Someone else replies with a timing diagram, translating transit hours into expected windows for magnetic field swings near the ecliptic. I file them beside the night schedule. Our exposure blocks stay as they are, only a touch more frequent. The point is not to catch something dramatic. The point is to be fair to whatever is real. Outside, the sky is a page you could tear by mistake if you breathed too loud. The tail of our visitor is a pale brushstroke pointing away from the sun, and in long exposures it thins until it becomes an idea more than a shape. We are far from the star, and yet still inside its weather. There is comfort in that contradiction. A system so big our measurements feel like tapping a barometer on a wooden porch, and yet those taps tell true. The numbers do not swell with adjectives, they nestle around a line. As the flare's decay slope settles, I refresh the overlay, a clean ephemeris arc beneath the new positions. Residuals remain small. The night shifts forward by half an hour. We take another sequence. The story repeats. If this were a fragile object, if jets were erupting in sudden, unbalanced bursts, the light would stutter and the fit would fidget. Instead, the coma's glow lifts a little, as warming can make it do, and the tail holds its quiet bend. The track through the stars stays true, star to star, grid to grid. I exhale with the same timing as the dome's slow yaw. There is a wider lesson I like to share at this point, even in a whisper. The sun's strongest moods are part of the normal range. We plan for them. We design instruments that do not panic. We lay baselines that can welcome gusts without tearing. Hearing the star speak in X-rays and particle counts is not a warning. It is a conversation we were ready to have. Our traveller answers in the same language it used yesterday. Position, light, gentle evolution. And that sameness is exactly what many hoped to see. At the end of the watch, I dim the screens until the false colour sun becomes a muted ember. The comet's last frame is saved, the pins logged, the comparison chart updated. No medals for this kind of night, only the small satisfaction of physics doing what it does while we do what we do. I let the colours drain from the displays, red to amber to a cool twilight blue, like a sky melting into dawn. The chapter softens there, and the sound of the room folds back into the larger quiet. Colour dissolves, and we drift. What does a thin thread of wind do to a stone that knows its course? If the wind is light and the stone is sure, the answer is almost nothing. That is our theme tonight. Thread and stone. A silver filament drawn across a loom, a shuttle passing through without snag. The sun breathes. Our traveller keeps its weave. Light itself presses. Photons carry momentum, and when they touch dust, they nudge it. Softly, steadily, like a fingertip smoothing silk. Radiation pressure is always on. Solar wind, the stream of charged particles flowing from the star, adds another gustier push. In space, these forces can sculpt a halo and comb a tail, yet the nucleus, the heart of ice and rock, keeps most of its promise to inertia. Mass matters, so does compactness. A dense, fast core answers to gravity first and to tiny breezes last, and that ordering remains even when the star raises its voice. Picture the warp and weft of it. A tail of dust spreads along the fabric of the solar wind, strands bright where the light catches, shadowed where the grains thin. Gas glows when sunlight kicks its molecules, blue ions swept into streamers that curve with the field. The loom continues. The shuttle moves. The pattern stays readable. A larger push would be needed to bend the path in a way our plots would notice, and the pushes on offer are smaller, briefer, easier to file under weather rather than fate. Jets from sun-warmed patches do exist. Sublimation turns buried ice into gas, and gas leaves in a hurry, carrying dust, adding a tiny thrust. We account for that in our math as non-gravitational terms, a quiet trio that lets the model tilt a hair if the data insists. Most nights those terms are modest for compact bodies, and their direction averages out as the nucleus turns. The result is a gentle persuasion of coma and tail more than a meaningful shove of the road itself. If a jet becomes unbalanced and wild, the light curve tattles first, not the trajectory. Think of torque as the whisper in the equation. Gas leaving one side tries to twist the core, changing the period of rotation over weeks or months. That is a slower, softer story than the sudden leap some imagine when they hear of explosive outgassing. A stable surface with pockets of activity tends to produce repeatable patterns, like a lighthouse that sometimes brightens a notch when its window turns toward us, then settles back. If we see such cycles, we fold them into understanding without panic. The silver filament holds, speed protects too. A hyperbolic excess means the traveler is already above escape, already carrying an energy that doesn't easily yield to small corrugations in the medium. Time under any one gust is short. Even if the solar wind thickens for a spell, the integrated push remains tiny compared with the momentum carried. It is like walking across a breezy street. The gusts ruffle your coat, perhaps change the sway of your scarf, but they do not carry you sideways unless you stop and let them. Our visitor does not stop. Let's leave the numbers for a minute and step into the picture. The scope breathes a slow mechanical breath. The sky is a deep cloth, star-laced, quiet at the edges. The tail is so fine it seems drawn in powdered glass, fanning gently from the coma's pearl. I can almost hear the hush of the solar wind in the way the long exposure smooths the stars into stillness. Far below, roads braid through sleeping towns. Far above, the great wind runs on, unseen yet everywhere, shaping nothing in haste. We sit with that for a while, like listening to rain against a window without reading meaning into every tap. When we return to the console, the models are where we left them, calm, expectant, built to capture tiny truths without jumping to large ones. They allow for a nudge if the nudge is real, and they discard it if the pattern fails to persist across nights. The art is not to force the numbers to stillness. It is to let them speak at their own low volume, and they say the same thing the images say. Coma trimmed, tail attentive, track unchanged in any way that matters for a path plotted across weeks. That is not romance. That is arithmetic under a soft lamp. Across the network, colleagues post slices of light curves and strips of sky where the visitor walks between field stars. The residuals line up like pins in a seam, straight enough to soothe. If you've ever watched someone stitch by hand, you know the satisfaction of evenly spaced marks. That is the feeling here. We keep stitching. We keep glancing at the weather. The cloth holds. Soon, another camera, not on Earth, will add its own quiet thread. From near Mars, a narrow field may catch the same pale trace against a different backdrop, confirming the rhythm we've heard all along. Geometry there helps in a way only a second perch can. Parallax shrinks doubts. The loom becomes wider, and the fabric of certainty thickens one serene layer more. We will visit that postcard next. For now, the shuttle slides on, steady through the shed, drawn by gravity's hand. Night has its long swell, the rise you hardly feel until you notice the lights on the horizon tilt and return. The star's breath lifts like that, then settles. The comet keeps its lane, silver filament unbroken, and the sea of space rolls under without fuss. We let the swell pass beneath us and look out into the dark, knowing the pattern will repeat. Not because we wish it so, but because the loom is well strung and the shuttle has momentum. The chapter closes on that slow lift and fall. The room dims and the night deepens. I remember the first GIF. 4 tiny frames from a narrow camera in Mars orbit looped into a quiet flicker. A peppered sky. One speck advanced between the stars by a few clean pixels and returned to the start. It wasn't dramatic. It was proof made small. I watched it twice, then 10 times, because the motion carried a kind of hush, rust hush, the colour your mind gives to Mars even when the images are grayscale. From another world, the geometry finally widened. Earth saw a traveller skimming the inner lanes with the sun off to one side. Mars, offset by tens of millions of miles, saw a slightly different sky. That difference is enough to pull doubt into shape. Parallax is a child's trick. Close one eye, then the other. Watch the finger jump. But in the sky, it becomes a ruler, longer than nations. The same speck against 2 fields ties our math tighter. Even if the frames are faint, even if the signal is a whisper, the shift matters. It narrows the lanes a traveller might be using, leans our confidence forward. Let me set the angle we had that week. The visitor's tail faced away from the sun, as always, a pale brush laid across the dark. Mars rode behind the curve of its orbit with a slightly different tilt, enough that the camera could catch the motion without fine star trails spoiling the measure. The images came short and careful, a few seconds each, then stacked. Between frames, everything rested. The spacecraft turned a fraction. The tracking bent the field just enough to keep the speck visible. It was a postcard from a red shore, mailed to every control room where someone had been squinting at noise. Let's pause there and sit with that shore. Imagine the dawn over a Martian crater. Thin light poured through a sky the colour of watered clay. The air is cold, almost absent, and it makes no sound when it moves. On the rim, frost hangs like breath that forgot to leave. Down in the flats, shadows are long enough to touch. If there were a microphone, it would record nearly nothing, only the small clicks of warm metal settling. Far above, an orbiter slips along its path, a silent gull over a silent sea, and the GIF we saw begins as a faint whisper recorded in that thin morning. We sit with it for a minute. We let the quiet be a kind of proof. Back in the workflow, we treat the Mars frames the way we treat any careful measurement. We plate solve them, anchor them to the same sky nets Earth uses, and pull out positions with honest uncertainties. We do not pretend they are perfect. We prize them because they are independent. When you add a second vantage point, the cloud of possible paths flattens and shrinks. The model that fit last night's Earth data now snaps a little more snug, like a well-tailored sleeve. If the sun had managed a stronger push than expected, if an asymmetric jet had tugged a little, the discrepancy would have had fewer places to hide. Instead, the curves met politely, and the visitor's road remained unbothered. Not every instrument on or around Mars could contribute. That's ordinary. Pointing windows close, filters don't match, or the target is simply too dim for a given detector and exposure time. A non-detection still speaks. It tells us that in that band, at that cadence, the object is below a threshold. Those limits help with light curve fits and with the modest question of how active the nucleus really is. We collect the yes and the maybe and the no with equal care, because together they fence the truth. The faintness was expected. The geometry was enough. The confirmation stood. I found myself thinking of old sea charts again. Mariners loved range lights, 2 beacons on shore that line up when you're on a safe course. Earth and Mars served as our range lights for a short while. When the speck on the Martian GIF lined up with the speck we had been tracking from our night, the channels made sense. We could trust the depth and the distance. We could trust the way the numbers had settled in the weeks before the sun grew noisy. New light from a second shore did not invent a new channel. It affirmed the one we had already drawn. There's a temptation to over-celebrate a moment like this, to speak as if a GIF is a trophy. I prefer to treat it as a hand on the shoulder. The object moved. It moved where it should. Faintness is not failure. Dim points become sturdy when they repeat their truth across instruments, across worlds. The tail's thread stayed aligned. The coma's glow held to a narrow, gentle rise that warmth alone can explain. The traveller continued its schedule, neither hurrying nor lagging. We matched that calm with our own. We logged, plotted, compared, and let the result be ordinary. Ordinary is a kind of grace here. Before the orbiter slipped behind Mars for the last pass of the window, I watched the loop once more. 4 frames, a step, a step, a step, a return. Then I closed the window and wrote the numbers where they belong. Across the planet, colleagues did the same. A quiet chorus, each voice soft, each note steady. From this distant shore, we had watched a distant traveller, and both remained distant in a way that brings comfort rather than loss. The sea between worlds lay smooth. We turned toward the rest of our night, with that calm in our pockets. A shoreline dimmed. The sound of waves we couldn't hear faded, and we let the chapter end like a boat settling into its moorings, gentle against the fenders, a last nudge from the tide, and then stillness. Timetables calm the tired mind. A line, a time, a promise. When trains arrive as printed, stations breathe easier. When celestial tracks match their tables, so do we. The curve on our screen is not romantic. It is a schedule kept. Pre-storm, during, and after, the points fall where the ink said they would. Right on time becomes a leitmotif, not a boast. Across 2 windows, I lay out bookends. Nights before the sun grew loud, nights after. Between them sits the peak, annotated and discreet. We ask a quiet question. Does the after inherit the before? Astrometric pins answer with a modest nod. Residuals hold steady, the way a platform clock keeps its pace regardless of chatter. A small drift would have made a pattern by now. A changed curve would have tugged the fit in one direction and refused to let go. Neither happens. Agreement between calculators is its own lullaby. The ephemeris I pull from one service and the orbit I fetch from another do not always speak in the same dialect. But tonight they rhyme. Predictions laid down days ago meet fresh positions without fuss. The timetable written in advance matches the train that rolls past the mark painted on the platform. We don't clap. We note it, and the calm deepens. I mark the parts in plain language because plainness wears well. The model expects gravity to write almost all the story. It allows a whisper from outgassing to tilt the lines if needed. That whisper is resolved into standard terms, not as decoration, but as a concession to ice warmed by sunlight. If the traveller's jets spoke louder this week, the numbers would have insisted gently. Instead, the allowance stays small, like a printed caveat at the bottom of a schedule that doesn't change where you stand or when you leave. There's a moment in every night when the room itself reminds you to breathe. The scope slews, then settles with a soft sigh. Air moves in a slow thread through the vents. The guider ticks in that patient way that feels like wheels lightly touching rail joints. I let the ambience have its minute. You could almost imagine a station master's lantern somewhere in the dark, steady and low, swinging once to say the track is clear. We hold the image until the mind unclenches and returns to the board. Back at the console, the overlays look like tidy rails. The pre-event best fit path is a dark line. Post-event positions sit upon it, not mechanically identical, but recognizably loyal. A strong shove would have widened the scatter or biased it to one side. What we see is scatter that refuses to vote either way. It centers on the ink. It behaves like noise that knows its manners. Numbers are allowed to be humble. We do not announce that forces beyond sunlight and momentum are absent forever. We say they are not demanding our attention tonight. Light curves rise with warmth and ease back as geometry changes. Tail structure answers the solar wind with a polite bow. The road, however, remains the road. If you tilt your head and hope for drama, the plot still reads as a schedule that keeps its head down and makes its stops. In the margin, I write small notes. Post-flare cadence increased. Yes. Additional stations chimed in. Yes. Combined solutions sharpened by repetition. Yes. None of these by themselves prove a negative. Together, they outline an absence of demand. No recalculation of closest windows. No sudden reprint of the page. We stay with the sheet we had, which is exactly what systems like this are built to do when space weather raises its volume, but not its leverage. The philosophy under this work is simple and kind. Let data from different hands and hemispheres argue with one another until they stop. If two clocks disagree, you do not crown one until you find out why. Here, the clocks are beginning to agree. Agreement does not make poems, it makes sleep. Watching the curve refuse to budge earns the same relief as hearing a late train announced as now arriving track 2. The shallow smile that follows is not excitement, it is tension leaving the shoulders. Someone on the network posts a compact report. New measures consistent within errors. No exclamation marks, just the steady tone of a guard checking seals on a door. Another adds a plot from a separate solver. The lines sit almost on top of each other, not perfectly. The world is never perfect, yet close enough that your pulse does not change. Distance windows remain where they were. The outbound arc keeps its grace. Right on time repeats in the mind, like wheels under a sleeping car. A few colleagues whisper about the non-gravitational terms again, as we always do. Could a quiet jet be hiding in the decimals? It could live there for a while, earning notice only after enough nights teach the model to include it. That would not be scandal, it would be housekeeping. So far, such housekeeping looks light. The train needs no new column. The page does not require a second edition. We stay seated, content to hear the same announcements at the same minutes past the hour. The final check of the night is a ritual I never skip. I dim the background, leave only the rails and the pins, and step back from the desk. If there was something stubborn and new, it would try to show itself here. What shows instead is a familiar alignment, a schedule kept under noisy skies, a curve that wouldn't budge when given every chance to ask for attention. I let the quiet land, then make a single, neat note, still on track, soft, hard cut. 5. Begin with the smallest push a traveller can feel and still confess. A non-gravitational acceleration, the faint signature of gas leaving sun-warmed patches and nudging the nucleus as it goes. It isn't a shove you'd notice in a glance. It hides in the fine print, tiny biases that repeat across nights and refuse to cancel when you stack good measurements. We model it with simple terms that point along sunward lines or sideways like a rudder, and we let the data decide if those terms should speak. Most of the time they whisper. Tonight they whisper. 4. Imagine an accountant's ledger where each entry is a coordinate with a little cone of doubt. Gravity writes the bulk numbers. The ledger balances even if you ignore the pennies. Then a column marked small forces gathers sense that might add up. Sunlight bouncing, gas escaping, the faint tug of an uneven surface. If those cents amount to dollars, the sums drift. If they don't, the line holds. Our solver checks both stories, pure gravity and gravity plus small terms, and rewards the one that behaves better as more pages are added. No drama, just arithmetic under a soft lamp. 3. Let the room fall quiet for a minute. Air moves in a thin, cool ribbon through the vent. The dome gives a patient click and rests. A kettle decides not to boil. On the screen, the residuals plot looks like snowfall that has learned manners. The guider ticks at a heartbeat that asks nothing of you. Outside, the night is a slate smudged with starlight, and the tail of our visitor is the faintest chalk line brushed once and left alone. In that hush, even the pencil I use seems to think before it touches paper. We sit inside the stillness and let breath unfold to the count of 4, then 3, then 2, 2. Chemistry has its say. Far from the sun, water ice sleeps, but carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide can stir earlier. Their vapor lifts dust, and dust changes how the coma glows. Sunlight hits a slope that faces dawn on the nucleus, and a jet skips off like steam from a kettle spout. Rotation turns that spout away. The effect averages. If the surface has several such patches, the pushes cancel more than they add. We expect a mild rise in brightness as the traveller warms, and we expect the path to keep its shape, unless the scale tilts from mild to unruly. Nothing we've seen asks for a new chapter. The existing paragraph just acquires a little emphasis. 1. Detection, if there's anything to detect, is not fireworks. It looks like a curve that leans the same tiny way night after night, or a fit that improves when you allow one more gentle parameter to breathe. The art is not to believe too soon or too late. We let independent observatories speak in turn. We invite the orbit calculators to argue. We check whether the light curve's small hum lines up with the geometry one would expect if a jet faced this way rather than that. If the case survives those chores, we keep the new term. If it dissolves as more pins land on the board, we let it go. Tonight, the ledger prefers the simpler story. Numbers from earlier visitors left us a vocabulary for caution. One showed a faint outward tug that stirred enthusiastic ideas. Another behaved like a classic comet with more dust than doubt. those debates taught a useful habit. Compare before you conclude, and name the unknowns without turning them into banners. Here, with this third traveller, the math is kinder. The path reads as gravity script, with perhaps a pencil mark in the margin, the sort that a later edition might keep or erase without changing the plot. If a nudge exists, it lives in the decimals and is content to be boring. I zoom into the fine print and trace the tiny arrows that represent allowable pushes. They are permitted to point sunward, anti-sunward, or sideways, in a way that mimics a slow spin presenting different faces to daylight. The lengths of those arrows are short enough that the fit can ignore them and not grow worse, which is the gentlest outcome of all. Either the forces cancel, or they are present and small, or they are not required yet. A day may come when the ledger asks for a new column. That day has not arrived. The curve we drive still reaches the same milestones at the same hours. Some voices outside the room like to rush to grand alternatives when they hear the phrase non-gravitational. I prefer patience. Extraordinary explanations are theatre. Small physics is home. Gas leaves, dust follows, a nucleus rotates. Numbers wobble by millimeters against a ruler 1 billion kilometers long. If you look for alarms, you can always hear an echo. But echoes live in architecture, not in visitors. Our architecture tonight is sound, many observers, many nights, a quiet agreement that spreads outward like ripples fading. There is a comfort in seeing how resistant the road is to embroidery. The sun's louder hours shuffled the comber's drapery and bent the tail enough to sketch. They did not demand a reprint of the timetable. CO and CO2 can whisper earlier than water and May, yet the whisper remains a background murmur against the engine of momentum. If anything changes substantially, we will feel it first in the light and only later in the path, and the order of those signals lets everyone sleep. Baselines accept small truths without letting them claim the throne. I end the count, lift my hand from the keyboard and listen for the little echoes, tick of a relay, click of a cooling plate, breath on the glass. The echoes die in the soft architecture of the room, the numbers quiet in the architecture of the model. 5 became 4, then 3, 2, 1. Now only the crawl of stars remains. What matters is still small. What is small is still honest. Echo lull. Imagine a darkened orchestra pit before the first note. Bows settle. Brass warms. A single oboe offers a pitch, and every section leans toward it until the room clicks into one shared breath. That is how nights like this feel. The sun is the stage. Our visitor is a quiet soloist crossing the lights, and the instruments that listen. Near the sun, above the earth, and on its turning skin, tune themselves to a shared pitch. Closer to the star, a craft rides heat, most machines would flee. It tastes the wind where the wind begins, counting particles, sampling fields, sketching the pulse that will wash outward hours later. Farther out, 2 vigilant sentries keep watch in white and ultraviolet, turning the sun's face into a clock of loops and flares. On the ground, domes swivel through the night, patient and practiced, pinning the traveller's place among the stitched stars. None owns the melody. Together, they make it legible. The near sun scout tells us when a front grows teeth. Density rises. Speed shifts. Magnetism swings like a door on a gust. Those numbers are not noise. There are conductors' hands marking tempo. Upstream notice buys downstream readiness. We transfer predicted windows to our tracking lists. Not because we expect drama, but because timing helps fairness. If a push can be felt at all, it'll be felt best when physics says it might. We place our exposures there, and we place them elsewhere too, so we can tell a wind from a wandering imagination. From Earth's orbit, imagers watch the sun breathe. A loop brightens and opens, a filament lifts, a halo peels away. You can read the alphabet of flares from A to X in the way a hand learns weather by the smell of rain. Here the choreography matters. A launch time, a plane of motion, a forecast cone. Then we follow the cone out, into the lanes between worlds, and we compare those times with the times our traveller walks past certain stars. If the drumline in the solar wind were to lean hard on the ion tail, we'd match the lean to the beat that caused it. If the lean never rises above the background sway, we nod and carry on. On the ground, the work is slower and more human. Observatory codes sprinkle a map of night. One telescope hands the target to the next as longitudes change. The sky's texture alters with altitude and air, yet the speck holds its measured glide. Coordinates arrive with their honest cones of doubt. Residuals fold toward small. The quiet ritual of compare and confirm plays like a repeating phrase in low strings, unglamorous and vital. These pins are the reason a storm can pass and leave the road unchanged in the ledger. Let's let the ambience have its minute. Control rooms dim to the colour of deep water. A technician's chair rolls and stops. Someone peels the backing from a strip of tape and labels a drive with a neat hand. In a dome far away, a shutter slides like a breath along the ribs of the sky. Air hums through vents with the evenness of a sleeping animal. You hear the tiny chime of a message arriving on a muted channel, and the softer sound of someone pouring tea into a paper cup. Nothing asks for haste. The pitch holds. Back in the flow, the virtue of many ears becomes obvious. If one instrument falls silent, another hums. If a bandpass doesn't love the dim green of this coma, a different sensor prefers it. A near-sun field trace lines up with a tail's slight bow. A second observatory confirms that the bow is not a quirk of weather or focus. The positions, the light curve, the solar logs, each plays a bar and leaves space. The arrangement is not lush. It is spare and precise. We lean on time more than on adjectives. A solar front's arrival is clocked. A sequence starts when it should. An overlay places the traveller where it promised to be. If the front had teeth enough to matter, the teeth would leave marks that survive a second look. Instead, the marks we keep belong to ornament, not structure. The coma trims and reforms. The ion tail sketches a faint kink, then relaxes. The path continues to pass through the same small gates in the starfield, as if the music's time signature were never in doubt. Some nights the chorus grows larger. A wide-field survey adds deep frames that catch the faint breath beyond the bright core. A high-resolution imager steals a moment between clouds and sharpens a point that had looked like a smear. A radio dish turns its patient ear toward the sun's yard again and reports a calmer flow. I paste their summaries into the notebook, not for decoration, but to let each phrase rhyme with the others. A rhyme is not proof, but a room that echoes the right way helps you trust your own voice. What this does for the nerves is simple. When many instruments with different flaws agree, you can stop staring at any single flaw. You can forgive a thin night of seeing because a thicker night arrives from another hill. You can let a saturated solar frame slide by because a different observer caught the same hour with better exposure. The melody becomes immune to any one throat clearing. You hear the line even if a violinist turns a page too loudly. That's how the story of this traveller assembles. Clear through redundancy, gentle through design. I think of all the people inside these machines. The engineer who taught a detector to keep its cool. The planner who threaded passes through narrow windows. The operator who knows exactly how long a mount will ring after a fast slew and waits for the ring to fade before opening the shutter. None of them asks for attention here. They let the pitch hold. We benefit from their restraint. The result is a chorus that carries a single, unremarkable, beautiful message. The road remains the road, even when the sun hums louder. When the shift ends, I dim screens until the control room looks like a stage after the final bow. Chairs at angles, cables resting. The glow on the big display falls through amber to grey. I leave one plot up for the person who will sit down after me. A thin line points snuggled along it, and a note that reads only synced with solar logs, no deflection seen. The light in the room follows that note, slow, dim, and we let the chapter close as softly as a house lamp turned with 2 fingers. Now the graphs breathe again. The sharp inclines of earlier nights soften into ordinary slopes, and the ticker at the bottom edge of the screen returns to a slower pulse. Now the sun's voice falls back toward its usual murmur, and the columns that once carried exclamation marks, peak, flux, arrival, quiet into plain numbers. Now the traveller is where it promised to be, a point that walks between field stars at a pace we can feel in our shoulders. Then the cadence returns to what we call normal. Telescopes pick up the baton in their old order. Sunset on one ridge, midnight on the next, pre-dawn on a mountain half a world away. The pins come in with the same tidy uncertainty we trusted before the star grew loud. There is comfort in the repetition. A night will add 4 measures, another will add 6. Each measure agrees with the score already on the stand. If something late and strong had crossed the lanes, some slow, hidden front, arriving after the headlines, it has left no fingerprint we can find. Then the page turns and the music holds. Later we compare the after to the before without romance. Light curves carry a gentle swell that warmth alone can explain, a bit brighter here, a bit calmer there, all within the envelope drawn weeks earlier. Tail structure that kinked modestly on a noisier night smooths on a quieter one. The ion streamer bows and unbows like a reed in shallow water. These are the clear shallows after a storm. Ripples without rips, shine without surge. Later, we annotate the margin. Morphology answered the weather. Motion did not. Later, the note becomes a line in the log. Now we let a full minute be only ambience. The room returns to the colour of a lake at dusk. A chair rolls and stops. Someone closes a cabinet with 2 fingers. Air threads through vents in a patient ribbon. The scope yawns, then rests. A faint relay tick answers from the pier. If you listen closely, you can hear paper slide under a clip and the soft scratch of a pencil writing one word, continued. The space between sounds is wide enough to sit inside. The mind unclenches and drifts with the numbers. Then we check for late kicks, the kind that ride behind earlier fronts and arrive quietly. Forecast cones said they could. Experience said they seldom matter for mass on a fast road. The crosscheck tells the same story again. Positions line up within their cones of doubt, neither leaning all to one side nor widening into a fatigue you can see. If a nudge landed after the noise, it was small enough to drown in the arithmetic of many hands. Then we accept that fairness requires this answer, the plain one. Later, independent solvers publish. One prefers a gravity-only fit, another permits a small whisper from outgassing. Both resemble each other so closely that an overlay looks like a single inked rail. In a corner of the chart, distance windows stay put. Predicted skygeats for the next week do not migrate. Observable again turns from a notice into a routine, and with routine comes the best kind of sleep, the kind earned, not guessed. Later, the summary reads, cadence resumed, agreement maintained, no revision. Now I reopen frames from nights wrapped around the peak and let them toggle. Now, then, later, now. The tail's bend keeps the same mild arc, adjusting its posture as the field changes, but not its nature. The coma swells with a patience that matches the curve of sunlight's warming. A fragile traveller would jitter here, its light stuttering beyond the slow rise, its path trying to shrug our fit off its shoulders. Nothing shrugs. Now the line holds and the shoulders drop. Then we pour the last tea and write the last small notes. Astrometry consistent. Scatter stable. No trend seen. These are not heroic words. They are ballast. They keep the keel down and the lantern steady. Across the network, colleagues echo the same cadence. A wide-field survey contributes a clean strip. A sharper telescope confirms. A solar log notes declining flux. Then the whole feels like a tide turning. No one commands it. Everyone recognizes it. Later, the sky itself offers a kindness. Seeing improves, the air steadies, the stars pin sharper than they did on the noisy night. The objects' walk between them is easier to measure, and even with that gift, the story does not change. The curve and the pins greet each other like old friends, neither surprised. We think of the late arrival of particles and shrug, not out of dismissal, but out of arithmetic. Time spent under any one front was short. The mass carried was not. Later, when we teach this passage, we will point to the after as calmly as to the before. Now the control room windows reflect a pale rectangle of morning. Screens are dimmed to spare the eyes of the next pair of hands. A single chart remains, unblinking. Points riding a rail, residuals tucked small. A note to continue cadence, no deflection. The sky outside lifts toward grey. Somewhere east of here, the moon is rising, slow and milk-white, wrapping the last stars in a softer cloth. We let that image stand for our ending, a gentle sphere easing above a low ridge, no rush, no flourish, only a pause that feels like rest. Moonrise, pause. Lay a hand on the table, breathe once, and imagine weighing a whisper. That is the exercise tonight. Take what did not move much and ask what it implies. We won't force numbers to speak louder than they can. We'll let steadiness narrow the range of likely truths. Gentle instruction, nothing showy. 3 slow breaths. Then we look. When a traveller keeps its course through noisy weather, it tells us something about mass and momentum without shouting the values. If radiation pressure and gusts in the solar wind cannot pry the path off its rail by more than we can measure, the object's area to mass ratio cannot be extreme. It is not a sail of dust, not a balloon. It behaves like a compact nucleus with enough inertia to favour gravity script over small breezes. That is not a boast about size. It is a limit earned from the absence of drama. In the ledger, no deflection seen quietly fences the possibilities. Light helps with the next fence. The brightness climbed as sunlight warmed the surface, but the rise was smooth rather than jittery. The coma remained tidy. The tail answered the wind with modest bows instead of flourishes. If the core were fragmenting or venting in chaotic jets, we would expect irregular brightening and lopsided drapery. We saw a composed halo and a tail that kept its lane. That composure implies cohesion, a nucleus that is internally sound enough to resist tearing, with active patches that are present but not unruly. Again, not a precise verdict, only a direction of travel for the truth. Rotation lives in this whispering field too. When gas leaves in a preferred direction, it tugs a little on the spin. If those tugs change quickly, periods shift. If they balance, periods hold. Across the window we watched, the light's gentle hum did not sprout a new beat that would hint at a tumbling change. The simplest reading is a slow, stable rotation with small torques that cancel more than they add. That kind of balance fits a nucleus whose vents are modest and distributed, not a single wild geyser throwing the rhythm off the page. Let's set the instruments down and give the room a minute. The screens dim to a cool blue-grey. A chair rolls a span and settles. Air threads through the vents like a river seen from high above, continuous, unhurried, exact. In some distant dome, a shutter sighs open and then lets the night speak. You can hear the tiny friction of paper as someone folds a log sheet, and the even smaller sound of a pencil tapping once, thinking. We sit in that soundless weave for a slow count, letting the mind clear. The ambience returns us to scale. A whisper weighed is still a whisper, and that is beautiful. Back at the board, steadiness lets us talk about material without pretending we tasted it. Spectra and colours point to familiar volatiles. Activity likely begins with the ices that wake early, then passes the baton to water closer in. The modest evolution of the coma suggests an insulating surface that warms and gives evenly, pockets flashing a little at dawn and resting at dusk. Nothing in the record demands exotic stuff. A visitor from away can still be made of ordinary ices and dust, arranged in an unordinary history. Stability argues for that gentler reading. Comparisons earn their place here, quietly. The first interstellar visitor left a small, persistent outward nudge that sparked debates about area to mass and odd reflectivity. The second looked every inch a classic comet, bright dust and all. Our traveller, by behaviour, leans toward the second while keeping its own restraint. No remarkable acceleration is required to explain the path. No unusual outbursts dominate the light. Each chapter we write for it uses familiar grammar, gravity in the lead, activity in supporting roles. If it adds a new sentence to the story of such visitors, it is this: steadiness itself is an insight. High-resolution follow-ups, on the ground and from space, turn steadiness into bounds. If you can't measure a deflection beyond a threshold, the cross-section can't be so large relative to mass that light and wind bully it. If you don't see fragments or sudden jets, the crust can't be extremely fragile. These are less than, greater than, unlikely if statements. They shape a silhouette. The silhouette we carry tonight looks like a compact, cohesive nucleus whose activity is present, tempered, and content to influence the drapery more than the road. There's also the lesson of time under force. Even a strong front in the solar wind works mostly through duration. A fast traveller shortens the exposure. If the same small shove acts for a shorter time, the accumulated push shrinks. Stability through a storm therefore points not only to inertia, but to the kindness of speed. The object crosses a noisy lane quickly, and the lane cannot claim it. Our fits would have shown a lean if the shove had lasted, or if the body had lingered. They did not. So the inference is humble and firm. Put these strands together, and a picture forms that suits the glasswork metaphor I keep beside this chapter. Imagine an unbroken pane in a bright window. Rain taps its surface and leaves patterns on the outside, but the pane does not craze or bow. You can read the weather in the drops, yet the view stays true. Our visitor's nucleus is that unbroken pane. The coma and tail are the water-tracing transient designs. When the rain passes, the clean sheet of glass remains, and the landscape beyond has not shifted by any amount you'd notice without calipers. Hush cadence begins there, in that felt quiet after a brief shower. Before we let the page turn, we honour the limits. Bounds set by steadiness are honest and partial. A later window could uncover a small, sustained bias, and we'll add it if it survives our tests. For now, the absence of demand in the data is itself information. It tells builders what a traveller like this must withstand. It tells modellers where to spend their care. It tells sleepy listeners what they needed to hear. That trajectory, brightness and spin are behaving as gravity and gentle heating say they should. In a loud season on the sun, quiet outcomes count double. Let breath slow. Let the pane stay whole. Let the chapter set down its pencil and close the notebook softly. Outward now. Angle widening, speed steady. The lane opens. I keep a simple map beside me. White posts for milestones, dates under each post. Not a promise, an appointment. Earth stays far. Venus farther. Giants, distant and indifferent. No alarms, only numbers that sit down quietly. The outbound arc is the mirror of the inbound, tilted by geometry and time. A hyperbolic path is an honest thing. It bends, then lets go. We watch the bend. We're watching the letting go. I mark the sky gates for the next weeks. Pre-dawn windows, low in the east. A sliver of time between the first birds and the first buses. Not for spectacle, just for keeping faith with the schedule. When clouds cooperate, a survey will catch a pale comma and hand us a few more pins. When they don't, the ledger waits a calm night longer. Either way, the posts remain where the model put them, white on white, like fence pickets in frost. Outbound geometry softens every worry that tried to bloom during the sun's louder days. Distance grows, and with it, the gentlest buffer a traveller can own, space itself. Radiation pressure keeps up its small, constant push. The wind keeps its soft shove. Neither argues with a course that moves away. I like to write distances as relationships, not bragging rights. Far enough that closest approach feels like a misnomer. Far enough that a shift of a few thousand kilometers matters only to the decimals, never to the night outside your window. Far enough that we can use calmer verbs. Pass, clear, continue. A short minute for the engine room of the observatory. Fans pull a low tide through the racks. Thermal control plate clicks, rests, clicks again. Someone, 2 rooms away, writes the date on a label in careful capitals. The smell is warm dust, cold metal, old paper. Even the light seems to choose the quietest angle across the floor, back to the map. The outbound leg crosses slim corridors of visibility. Northern latitudes get one kind of mercy. Southern sights get another. We share time, trade frames, stack the faintest ones with patient math. I note the planet posts the way road crews mark mile markers after a storm. Earth's marker, unchanged. Venus, safely off to the side, a passerby's passerby. Jupiter, an observer, not a partner in the dance. No gravity well reaches a hand this time. No need to speak of encounters when the spacing keeps its manners. There are nights when observable again appears in the daily notes like a small bell, not bold, not blinking. A line item that says the air steadied, the angle improved, the visitor obliged. Those nights feed the exit fits. Those fits go into a cupboard labelled reassurance. Sometimes I sketch the road with one stroke. Inward curve, the briefest near-sun slide, then outward release. Underneath I write the plainest lesson the path can teach. Gravity is generous with arcs and stingy with captures when the speed is high. We could fuss over second-order terms here. We could chase tiny talks through one more decimal place. Instead, I guide your attention to what survived, comparison after comparison. Mileposts that didn't move, windows that didn't shift, a timetable that didn't need a second printing. A few practical notes for colleagues who keep watch at dawn. Check the low east before sunrise. Give yourself time for air mass to behave. Use the same filters you used last week, even if the temptation to swap is strong. Continuity is a kind of kindness. Tonight's stack will thank last week's stack for the match. For those on the other side of the world, swap dawn for dusk and keep the same patience. No one sight owns the road outward. We are a relay, not a sprint. White posts pass from hand to hand. I add a line at the bottom of the page that reads like a weather forecast. Quiet solar wind predicted, routine cadence fine. If an upstream monitor hints at a front, we nudge exposure blocks toward the likely hour. Not for drama, only to keep the test fair. We've learned that fairness to small effects is a habit, not a mood. What does all this mean if you're listening to rest? It means the story keeps choosing the softer verb. It means this visitor enters, bows, and exits without asking us to rewire the sky. It means you can picture the outward lane as a long, pale road over a calm plain, with white posts fading into the distance at even intervals. I let the final panel on the screen hold a single trace, a thin curve crossing through labeled dates, a handful of dots perched on it like small birds on a wire, and a note in the corner that says, "Outbound, cadence steady." We leave it there, lit like a nightlight in a quiet room. Now I take the map, fold it once, and slide it into the log. The fold makes a soft crease you can hear with your fingertips. We'll open it again, soon, under the same lamp. For now, the road outward is a calm bridge to whatever comes next. Drift with it to the next chapter. Drift and let the posts pass by like measured breaths. We return to the same few sentences until they became gentle music. We drew bass lines. We kept cadence. We compared before and after. We let small effects be small. Echoes of those lines run through the room as I settle in for the summing up. The lamp is low. The monitors are dim. Air moves in a soft ribbon. Far away, the dome completes a slow turn and rests The sound is the hush of a house at night. In a corner, a heater ticks once and falls still again, like a banked ember breathing. We sit inside that warmth and listen to the quiet report our work has earned. We watched a visitor cross the inner lanes while the sun lifted its voice. We measured the loud hours, let the numbers speak, and found no demand for a new story. The path held. The halo brightened as warmth would make it do. The tail bowed and unbowed with the wind, and still the road held. That is one refrain. The other is about us. We chose patience over spectacle and routine over alarm. We allowed redundancy to carry the tune so that no single instrument had to sing alone. I keep thinking about what a third visitor does to a young vocabulary. The first taught caution with surprises in the fine print. The second taught recognition with the confidence of a classic comet. This one teaches steadiness. It says the sky can host a storm and a quiet traveller at once. It says that physics prefers continuity and will reward it if you let your instruments keep time. We add that sentence to our glossary. Not every loud week begs a loud conclusion. Sometimes no deflection seen is the most important line in the log. Facts wove the blanket. Solar monitors gave us start times and peaks and cones. Near-sun scouts transmitted the pulse before it reached our lane. Ground domes marked positions and light in their slow relay. When Mars offered a second vantage, we took it and watched a faint dot make a few clean steps. When the star calmed, we watched the calm return to the charts. And still, the road held. The refrain makes a kind of peace with the season. There's a softer way to say the same thing. The object moved as things move, when gravity writes most of the script, and small forces add commentary, not edits. Brighter, yes, in a clean curve. Coma, tidy. Tail, attentive. Rotation unbothered by more than modest whispers. Cohesion implied by how little the light stuttered, by how even the drapery stayed when the weather grew loud. These are edges drawn by absence, silhouettes cut from calm. Let the ambience have a minute, because endings deserve space. The control room glows like a hearth at low flame. Tea cools in a paper cup. A notebook lies open to a page with tidy handwriting where dates become a kind of lullaby. Outside, frost powders the handrail and does not melt under this quiet light. Somewhere a fan draws a steady breath through the racks and lets it go. You can feel the room's temperature pause in the comfortable place where skin forgets to notice air at all. Even the cursor on the last screen pulses slower, as if it learned the night's lesson. We sit with that and let the pulse pass us by. I will not pretend steadiness gives us more digits than we have. It gives us fewer guesses instead. Upper limits on area to mass, lower limits on cohesion, a refusal of the path to drift beyond its allowance when the sun calls for attention. Those are small gifts, and they matter. They tell designers what a traveller like this must survive. They tell planners how to budget patience. They tell us, who listen to fall asleep, that quiet is not ignorance. It is a result. We kept a ritual throughout. Ask, align, compare. Invite a second method to disagree. Let the disagreement teach the next step. When the flare numbers rolled in, we didn't change the ritual. We only made it more generous with time. When late arriving fronts crossed the ecliptic, we looked. And when they left, without leaving marks that survived a second night's scrutiny, we wrote continued and moved on. And still, the road held. The refrain returns, not for drama, but for rest. Comparisons help a story find its size. Against the first and second visitors, this one sits closer to the calm end of the shelf. It is neither austere nor flamboyant. It is composed. If it carries strangeness, it hides it where our present instruments cannot pry. That is not a defeat. It is an invitation to read steadiness as a kind of character. A banked ember glows without crackle. You feel the heat more than you see it. Our traveller left that kind of warmth in the data. What remains for the weeks ahead is simple. Keep cadence. Share dawns and dusks. Treat the outbound road as a long breath to be counted, not a sprint to be won. If any small term wants to be noticed, it will choose consistency as its voice. If none chooses, the ledger will say the same quiet thing again. Either way, the sky is generous enough to teach us with what it withholds. I look once more at the line we have driven from first sight to now. Dots sit where dots should sit. A curve runs through them with the ease of a practiced hand. There is a note in the corner of the panel that reads, in plain letters, trajectory stable, cadence steady. That note is a lullaby. It is the shape of our patience, measured and kept. If you are drifting, let it carry you. If you are awake, let the words soften the edges of the room. We did not chase a firework. We tended a hearth. I close this chapter the way I close the dome on the last clear watch, with one slow turn of the wrist and a respect for what remains glowing. The lamp on the desk is a last candle. The ember in the logbook is the line we earned. We leave them to keep each other company. You can rest now with the quiet idea that a visitor crossed and did not flinch, and that we told its story without hurry. The candle's circle shrinks, and the dark becomes soft, not empty. Breathe once more with the stars' long rhythm. Then, let the room fall to hush. Thank you for keeping me company on this quiet watch. Our visitor crossed the inner lanes while the sun grew loud and the measurements held. Positions from many observatories met the path predicted before the flares. Residuals stayed small. No reprint of the timetable was needed. Light rose gently. The course stayed true. Solar monitors marked flares and ejections in clean numbers, and upstream sampling gave the pulse before it reached our lane. We compared those hours with fresh astrometry and found agreement instead of alarm. The traveller walked between field stars at the moments promised by the ephemeris, during and after the peak. A second vantage helped. Frames from Mars' orbit showed the same faint motion across a different sky, adding parallax that tightened the fit. Combined with ground arrays, those steps confirmed the line we had drawn on calmer nights. Independent solvers still rhymed. Closest approach posts stayed where they were. Models allowed for small non-gravitational nudges, yet none was required to explain the data we saw. If a whisper exists, it lives in decimals that did not grow teeth. Gravity wrote almost all of the script. Outbound now, distances increase and visibility slips to slim dawn and dusk windows. So we kept our ritual. Ask, align, compare, and share the work across longitudes. Mars confirmed, ground arrays persisted, solar logs set fair tests, the curve held. The reward was steadiness, facts returning each night, like a tide that remembers its marks on stone, even when weather sings louder. If you are drifting, let that steadiness be your pillow. A visitor arrived, held its line, and continued on. We listened carefully, and the sky answered softly. Thank you for being here. Sleep comes easier when the road remains the road. Good night, and gentle dreams until morning. Rest well tonight.